Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, after Helene, an Asheville guitar maker grapples with how to help her neighborhood when there's so much need.
I'm trying to reframe my thinking into, okay, I can build an instrument and I can donate to those places that really specifically matter just to me.
A church in West Virginia is helping turn unwanted guns into garden tools.
It's informed by Scripture, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. And they shall turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.
And for writer Wei Tchou, it took leaving her home in East Tennessee to start seeing herself in a new way.
It felt important to be able to say that I was Appalachian because there's no one around to say I wasn't, in the same way that when I was growing up in Johnson City, I just constantly felt like I didn't belong.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
I don't really want to do it. I don't know.
Let's play Freight Train. You can do that.
Earlier this year, we visited the workshop of renowned guitar maker Wei Henderson for a story about him and his daughter, Jane Henderson. Jane is also a luthier and a reluctant musician. Here, she's playing a ukulele she made for her dad, and her dad is playing a guitar that she also made. Jane lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and Wayne lives in Rugby, Virginia, both places that were wrecked by Hurricane Helene. After the storm, Jane and her husband and daughter evacuated to Richmond, Virginia, where they have family. Folkways reporter Margaret McLeod Leaf caught up with Jane in the days following the storm.
When I last saw you, you showed me your home studio in Asheville, and we had no idea then what was coming for Western North Carolina. I'm wondering if you can kind of take me back to when Hurricane Helene hit. You know, what were you doing? Had you made preparations? What was that like?
I don't think any of us prepared. I mean, I don't think anyone could have predicted the amount of destruction and the amount of displacement. It had been raining. It was for the first couple days. I had prepared to lose power those days, and we didn't. I didn't fill the bathtubs. I just didn't even think about it. And then that night, there were alarms on my phone, going off all night long, flash flood warning, evacuation at 3, so we didn't sleep great that night. But I looked out and I was like, I think we're fine. And then we came out the next day. I heard at maybe 5:30 a.m., I heard this huge crash. I was like, whoops, a tree fell down there. And then we looked out. I didn't know the extent of it, honestly. None of us did. We walked out on the street and, there were a bunch of trees down. Oh, my neighbor, his trees are down, or some from our property are down. But we didn't have any water damage at our house. But the power was out. I didn't have cell phone service or internet. And then I think once we started realizing the extent of it, my neighbor drove. She came over. She's like, I couldn't text you. Can you drive me? There's trees in our yard, and I can't get out. Can you drive me to Home Depot to get a chainsaw? I was like, sure. And we went, and Home Depot was open. But as we drove there, and it's a mile down the road, there were trees, 100-year-old trees just on the ground. And I was thinking, what has happened? And then I think, the next day we took a walk around the block, and everything was gone. It was horrific. It looked like a war zone.
I wonder if you can kind of paint a picture of your neighborhood and your favorite places and, what those places mean to you and what you saw.
When we took our walk around the block, our neighborhood, we're a tight-knit community. And my husband and I, we meet for lunch, I don't know, maybe once a week down at our friend Shawnee's coffee shop. She has a coffee truck. And also once a week, we walk a little bit further to this place called Curse's Kimmy. It's the most beautiful bar. It's just lovely. And Dylan and Jeff and the owners there are amazing. we love this area that we live in. We took that walk, and Matilda, my daughter, she was in this stroller, and she's like, can we go to Shawnee's? And I said, well, we'll go check. We'll go see if we can check on Shawnee. And we tried to get down there, and there was so much debris. I mean, we looked, and there were cars piled up. The power of that water had to have been astronomical. I can't even imagine it. But our places, our people are hurting, and our places they're supposed to be there. They're always there. Why? How could this have happened? Shawnee's coffee truck was totally all the way to the roof, water. The water was so high, one street parallel from our street, like we just happened to be up on a little hill. But then you walk down Curses Kimmy, our lovely little oasis where Matilda plays soccer. It's this beautiful field out there in front of the river. It's just so pretty. It's just not there. It was a mangled, some metal, like twisted up pieces of metal.
At what point did you decide to evacuate?
We were there for 3 days. I got nervous having a small child with no water and no power. It started to make me feel anxious. I called my cousin. I could walk up the street, and if I turned my phone off and back on, I got 2 bars of 5G and could make one call before it went back to not, but that was better than most. So, but I told my husband, we have to get out of here, and we'll just go up to my dad's. And I called my cousin, and she's like, you can't go there. I'm like, yeah, but he has a generator. Like, you can't make it there. Several people told me that all of the bridges there are washed out. So it's not just me. It's these tiny communities. It's not just Asheville.
So when we met, I got to tour your workshop in Asheville, but you also invited me to see you work alongside your dad, who is also a renowned luthier, in his workshop in Rugby, Virginia. I'm wondering how his area fared.
His area is not any better than mine, honestly. He did okay. I think both of us, property-wise, got by extremely lucky. We both have our things, our physical things, but around us is tatters. But I think survivor's guilt is a thing too. I know that I'm lucky. I don't want to feel guilty. I want to push that energy into paying it forward to, pay my luck into energy to help. My dad's he's building a guitar to raise money for the Rugby Fire Department rescue squad. Because honestly, these smaller communities need it. But what I want to build something to, if I can, I'm not sure if it'll be a guitar or a ukulele. I mean, I need to get paid. I need to do my job and make sure my instruments get out to the people who've asked for them. But also this matters so much to me that I'm going to have to do it to help me feel like I can make a difference. But it's just that money would go directly, to Shawnee, to Bottle Riot, to Curses Kimmy, to our places that we don't have now. And that these, Lori, the owner of Bottle Riot, said that insurance wouldn't cover anything. And Asheville's a big place, and it's getting a lot of attention. But there are just so many small places. It's about to get cold. There's so much that needs doing, and it does feel overwhelming. But I'm trying really hard to think of it like, when I build a guitar, if I think of, okay, I have to make a guitar, I get really overwhelmed and want to put it off. But if I think I make my list of, okay, I have to glue my top and back together. Okay, I have to if I separate it into doable tasks, then I feel more productive and like I can do it. So I'm trying to reframe my thinking into, okay, I can build an instrument and I can donate to those places that really specifically matter just to me. I can't help all of Western North Carolina and Southwest Virginia. I can't. But I have a platform. Thank you for giving me this platform to tell people to help us, not just Asheville, but these, my dad's areas, these little tiny towns that were decimated. Swannanoa, my friend's mother-in-law, her house is gone. My friend Billy, his house and his car are gone. Just gone.
It's unreal. I know that music communities often come together in a time of crisis. How have you seen your music community in Asheville and beyond pull together through this ordeal?
My dad and I were supposed to go play a show at the Station Inn in Nashville last Thursday, and we were feeling so displaced that I just said I can't do it. But it'll be my one and only invitation to play anything at the Station Inn. Not that I have any business doing it, but anyway, it was a great thing. I was excited to go. But what happened instead, our friend Brian, who invited us to do this, he pivoted and invited Eddie Pennington, a couple of our really good friends from Kentucky who we've known and loved forever, and Clay Lunsford and several other really great local musicians. And they went and they played that show and donated. They made over $10,000 they donated to the rescue squad for my dad. And I love that people are using those talents. And I think also music has that visceral power to bring calm, to bring happy. You can elicit so many emotions from music. I love that it can bring us together in a place of hope, and we can feel things and let those emotions mingle together because of hearing a certain piece of music. And I love that people do find comfort in listening to it and coming together to make it. And I really think that it's a special thing, and I'm lucky I get to be part of that as well.
Your instrument work involves a commitment to environmental sustainability. I'm wondering how this climate change-fueled disaster, how that has impacted your perspective or how you're thinking about that.
I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't drive by all those downed trees and wish I could make an instrument from them. Like, I wonder what they're going to do with that old growth oak over there. What about that walnut? But I'm not sure if it has altered my thinking, because my thinking has always been climate change is real and we need to address it. And maybe the thing is I need to be more aggressive in my speaking with clients with the platform I have, because, I still drive a car with gas in it. There's so many things that we can change, that we need to change. I don't know if this disaster has just sort of highlighted, like, well, look, it's happening. I don't know who needs to hear this, but this is a direct result of what we have been doing with the choices that we have been making in our natural world and using the resources that we've used. We need to work on alternatives. My friend Frank, his house is in Inglewood, Florida. He has one there and has one in Rugby. He just got hit. He got hit by Helene in both houses, and Milton just took him out. But all of my work was in there. He had a guaranteed waterproof safe, and all of my instruments, the best ones I've made and some of the nicest ones my dad has made. He has 45s. He has fancy stuff, totally just flooded. And it's heartbreaking for me. It's like I'm getting angry to see this now. I was thinking the other day about the stages of grief. I've got the depression for sure, got the bargaining, all of that. And now I'm on to anger. I'm angry now. I'm going to have trouble with the acceptance. I understand that it is a thing that happened, but, I'm mad because that was stuff that I made with my hands. And because everything else hasn't really directly impacted me. I hadn't lost anything specifically. And again, those aren't my instruments, but they are. To me, those beings are something that I put so much of myself and my love into, and to see them like that after both of us, their new steward and me, both put so much love into caring for them, are just gone because of this disaster. We got to do better.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. I know this is a difficult topic, and you're kind and generous to speak with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I mean, I feel that there are probably better suited folks out there who have lost more, but I appreciate the platform, and I wish well to everyone who's hearing this. I hope they haven't lost all of their things, and if they have, there's hope that we can get it back.
That was luthier Jane Henderson speaking with Folkways reporter Margaret McLeod-Leaf. The interview is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. To learn more, check our website, wvpublic.org. Coming up, an Asheville bar owner reopens for business and for the community.
Having an outpost, and we're kind of like sharing resources here, but also giving people just a sense of normality, to be able to curl up to a bar and have a drink and talk to a bartender. It's been really helpful for my mental state as well.
You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, educating the people of our region and beyond for more than 150 years. More information at concord.edu.
Cleanup efforts following Hurricane Helene are ongoing in western North Carolina. Nearly 100 people died in the storm and its aftermath, and it will take years to rebuild. And yet, locals are finding ways to return to their regular way of life. Blue Ridge Public Radio's Gerard Albert III brings us this.
In the days following Hurricane Helene, the streets of downtown Asheville were eerily quiet. But after about a week, things started to sound more like they used to.
People are like, when are you going to play music? I'm like, that seems like the weirdest thing possible to do right now. But they're like, dude, please. Like, you know what I mean? They're like, anywhere. They're like, we got generators. I was like, I could do it right here.
That's Mike Martinez. If his voice sounds familiar, it's because he hosts on the weekends at BPR. In his other life, he's a musician and a DJ. After the storm, he drove hours to check on friends. He saw entire houses destroyed. When he returned to Asheville, he needed another way to contribute.
Aside from getting information out or checking on, make sure everybody has what they need, I think this is also a need that people have, Also, it makes me feel normal too,
Drew Hendrickson owns Imperial Bar, where Martinez is playing music. He says the initial decision to open for a few hours in the afternoon was financial. Then he saw how many people showed up.
Realized it wasn't just financially driven at all, that this means something, especially to a lot of people around the block and in the community. Having an outpost, and we're kind of like sharing resources here, but also giving people just a sense of normality, to be able to curl up to a bar and have a drink and talk to a bartender. It's been really helpful for my mental state as well.
Hendrickson weathered the storm from the bar. There was little damage, but he still feels a collective grief.
It's even if it's not a direct, harm on my business or my home or whatever. It's like seeing my friend's life shattered. It sucks. And, and for people to be able to kind of come here and get that sense of, all right, I'm coming home now after a hard day of work, trying to piece it together, And I think that's really meaningful and I'm glad to be a part of that, and doing what I can do. This has given me a lot of sense of normalcy too, to be able to check out and just serve guests,
Ray Goldstein is also finding music to be a way to help others heal.
I feel like I have a lot to offer through music, and it feels like something that I'm really able to provide as a thing of joy for people around me and for myself, to get through my own emotions dealing with everything.
They acknowledged that trying to feel normal again came with some guilt.
Just trying to find the balance between doing the things that keep me going and struggling to feel like that's valid in a time where there's so much grief.
Goldstein is part of the Brass Your Heart band. Tonight, they were practicing for the first time since the storm hit in a West Asheville parking lot. Kurt Thassler is also in the band.
Sometimes just getting out and doing something, even if it's just like making some noise and like making some music with some friends and some people that you care about, you might bring a smile to someone else's face. And really, like, it seems like it's superfluous, but that joy that you bring to other people, that can also be really important and really significant. Even just putting a smile on someone's face is really valuable in these times.
Down the road from where the band was practicing, another group was meeting for the first time since the storm. Spencer Beals has been running a sketchbook club for almost 2 years. The group usually meets in the River Arts District, one of the hardest hit areas in the city. Beals' studio was destroyed.
The last few days I hadn't cried, but standing up there, I was able to cry in front of my family, and that was beautiful, man, and it was needed. And, man, it's just a lot of people have lost so much, and it's just amazing to be able to hold a space where people can come together and know that, like, hey, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I don't know if you're going anywhere, but I'm going to be here, and we're going to rebuild this thing, and the River Arts District is going to rebuild itself.
Erica Schaffel always attends Sketchbook Club and was happy to not miss a week.
It feels like such a privilege to be able to be together as a community, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's nice to have a minute that feels normal.
Get stronger,
Outside the Swannanoa Library, people set up a phone charging station, a medical supply tent, and were serving hot food. Bill Altork was eating one of those free meals when he had an idea.
And this light came on in my head and said, why don't you just come down here and sit in the corner and see if you can add to an uplifting feeling to the neighbors in the community. And that was motivation enough to get me to sit here right now as we speak.
Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
As Altork plucked away, kids played football on the grass field, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. I'm Gerard Albert III, BPR News.
Blue Ridge Public Radio has compiled a list of ways to donate and help with flood recovery and relief. You can check that out at bpr.org. Sometimes when people die, they leave behind guns, and their relatives don't always know what to do with them. So a church in West Virginia's Eastern Panhandle is providing a way to dispose of old firearms and find new uses for them. WVPB's Jack Walker reports.
Earlier this month, power tools hummed along a Shepherdstown roadside. The sound came from behind the local fire department. It's where community members dropped off something they no longer wanted. Their firearms.
It's informed by Scripture, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, and they shall turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.
That's Leslie Williams, a member of the Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church. She's talking about an event called Guns to Gardens, which brought folks to the fire hall this month. Here, people anonymously drop off unwanted and unloaded firearms. The program is held nationwide, but this was its second year in Shepherdstown. Williams said the first event was held after the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut. Then it spread. Residents pull up with their guns in the trunk of their car. Volunteers guide them to the power tool station, where their guns are taken apart. Dave Smith, a member of the power tool crew, said they're specially trained to do this.
We follow both the national protocols and then the kind of techniques that we learn from local metal workers.
Since they're no longer guns, no transfer of ownership is required. The leftover wood and scrap metal are repurposed into gardening tools. In exchange, participants get grocery store gift cards. Williams said reasons people get rid of their firearms vary.
It's everything from people who are, old and say, my hunting days are behind me, I want to give it, I'm done with them. It might be we've had widows whose husbands were hunters or marksmen, and the husbands died, and they're like, I don't know what to do with these guns, and I'd like them gone. We had one person last year who said, yeah, I'm ready to get rid of my gun, but the last thing I want to do is give it to a pawn shop because you don't know what's going to happen from there. So most of the guns are already in safe hands, but people come here because they want to make sure that they don't go into anyone's hands.
According to Williams, the community's response has been mostly positive, but gun control can be a touchy subject in West Virginia. The church had security on site, but some residents stopped by to express discontent or raise questions about the event. Among them was Chris Anders. He's a Republican running to represent Berkeley County in the West Virginia House of Delegates.
I was very curious. I received a couple phone calls about it, and I went down to, I was actually reloading ammunition for deer season when I got the phone call. So I ran down right away to try to judge and ascertain what was actually going on.
Anders said he was taken aback by the event. He doesn't see getting rid of guns as a solution to gun violence.
Helping the anti-gun radicals start to vilify and reduce civilian access to firearms. If you want to reduce, you want to increase liberty, more civilians should have firearms, and you also less government agents.
Anders says gun access is protected by the Second Amendment. Meanwhile, members of the church say they respect the Second Amendment. Smith says Guns to Gardens is also about free choice because it provides people a safe way to give up their firearms. While he doesn't think that will end gun violence across the country, he thinks it could still make an impact.
We're not going to make a dent in the number of guns in our country, of course, obviously. But for us, it helps. It's an opportunity to change the way we talk about guns and think about guns. And hopefully there are occasions when, we may be taking a gun out of an unsafe situation.
Smith said gun deaths can come from suicide or firearm accidents, and that disposing of a gun could potentially reduce these risks. Anders also expressed concern that historic or valuable guns could be destroyed. But Smith says the church had a gun checker on site, and he said they could tell people whether their firearms held financial or historical significance, so they could make informed decisions. Reverend Gusty Lene Newquist leads the Shepherdstown Presbyterian congregation. She says the event also offers relief to people who feel burdened by owning a gun.
We've had people come with tears in their eyes that they finally have a place to give a gun that maybe has been used in a suicide or just a collection of guns that was from a family member, but they don't really know what to do with it.
And Newquist says that fits into the mission of her church.
In terms of, is this something that our congregation does? I would say that we are a congregation that is committed in our identity to working for justice and wholeness in ourselves and in the world. And so this is not the only kind of event we do. We do other kind of peacemaking events and events to bring out the well-being of society as well.
Over the course of the event, the church collected and dismantled a total of 40 guns, 15 more than the year prior. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Jack Walker in Shepherdstown.
If the thought of home stirs something up in you, I've got a book recommendation. Little Seed by Wei Tchou is a hybrid of nature writing and memoir. Chou's parents migrated from China and raised her in eastern Tennessee. The book's chapters alternate between stories of her passage into adulthood and eloquent descriptions of ferns and closely related plants. I recently spoke with Chou on a call from her home in New York. A note, this interview was recorded several weeks before Hurricane Helene. Wei Tchou, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia and speaking with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So your book, Little Seed, is amazing. It's about many things, including identity and how people around us can shift how we think about our own identity. You get into a number of your identities in this book: Chinese, daughter, little sister. Do you identify as Appalachian too?
I definitely identify as being Appalachian, and as your show explores, it's like such a nuanced and like small identity within the identity of being Southern. I remember when I was like putting this book out, it felt really important to me that it was thought of as a Southern book and I was thought of as a Southern writer, but it's just like too much of an ask, you know? And I felt like it was important for me to be with Deep Vellum, which is a press in Texas, because I want the identification of being Southern. And I think that felt like the more legible ask, right, than saying like, I'm from the Mountain South. But yeah, I think very deeply I identify with the place. And I think that there is this like relevance to all of these like identities I'm talking about in the book, which is this push and pull of I want to be Chinese, but I also don't. I want to be seen as feminine or as like a woman, but also there are all these like deep contradictions and terrible parts about being a woman or being feminine. And, you know, and I think it's the same with how I feel about being Appalachian, especially as like I sort of like move into bigger pools where it's not even something that you're able to explain very well to like say someone who's from New Jersey.
Your family's from China, and even your older brother was born in China, but you are not. So how did your family land in Eastern Tennessee, and what were your first memories of the mountains of the region?
So my family has always been in the South since they immigrated. I think that's kind of just a luck situation. My grandfather actually came over first in the 40s, which is quite rare given like just like immigration patterns and the legalities of emigrating at the time from China. China was closed. But yeah, he came and he interned at a hospital in West Virginia in a town called Williamson. And while he was here, China wound up closing its borders, and he wound up marrying a white woman in West Virginia. And he also wound up enlisting during World War II. And so I think some combination of these factors allowed him to claim U.S. citizenship. But yeah, apparently there was a provision that if you had a relative in another country, in the States, for instance, who passed away, then like you could get out of China at the time. So my grandfather died in kind of this like freak flying accident. So my dad was able to come over with my aunt. And so they kicked around West Virginia for a while. My dad was in Atlanta working in restaurants. And then eventually sort of was able to find his way back to being a doctor, which is what he was trained for in China. And in Chinese culture, there's a lot of ancestry worship, which just means that you believe that the deceased are looking over you. And that is like tied to your fate, is honoring your deceased, honoring your ancestors and your lineage. And so there was always a sense in my family that you couldn't move too far away from the root. And in our case, the root is my grandfather, who's buried in Williamson. And so there was a sense that I think my family always made decisions to make sure that like they were always in driving distance of going to his grave to pay our respects. So a lot of, you asked about my childhood memories of Johnson City and West Virginia and all these places, these like mountain places I grew up in. And so many of my childhood memories growing up in the mountains were these road trips through what really feels like a jungle, or like it feels like deep forest. And even in Johnson City, I just had these like very intense sense memories of autumn, the leaves changing, the kind of like wetness in like Cherokee National Forest. I remember being a little kid, and I can remember them taking us out into the woods so often, or taking us out to play, and the teachers teaching us how to identify sassafras or, you know, tulip poplars or like whatever it is. And all of that education stuck with me. As a child, it was really like, I think, grounding to look at the natural world and be encouraged to like interact with it and ask questions and be told like what the names of these things are, what role they had in like the culture that I grew up in.
The bit you talked about with sense memory resonates partly because my dad was a botanist at a community college and he studied red spruce. I have these sense memories of being in the Smokies and in parts of Western Virginia and West Virginia where there's just rhododendron tunnels and ferns everywhere. So I was really compelled by your book and its descriptions of ferns and the related plants, and how the descriptions are technical and yet poetic. And they're also tied to this underlying story about your family. Did your interest in ferns grow directly from coming up in Appalachia?
No. I
Yeah.
think it's actually like, in some ways, it's part of maybe like the loss and longing of the book is like to feel like as someone who was an adult, that I got really into ferns, but the kind of wet, deciduous forests, the Smokies in West Virginia and Johnson City, where I grew up, that's where you go look for ferns. That's like the entire childhood of growing up in a place like that is where you expect to learn the differences between like a Christmas fern and a bracken, like whatever I'm writing about in the book. And I think that was like kind of a constant feeling that I had as like I wrote the book, is I wish that I was more awake to this like world of ferns when I was like younger, because like I would have had the opportunity. But I think that's also the point of the book, is that even if you are immersed in nature, like I was as a kid, inevitably, because you grow up in this place where like everything's about nature, there's an entire ecosystem that you miss and that everyone misses. Like nobody really thinks of ferns. And I think even though I was taught to name a lot of plants and trees and flora in general as like a child and as a teenager, like I don't know that anyone ever pointed to a fern and said, this is what that is. So yeah, indirectly, I think that growing up in Appalachia, like that kind of deep reverence and also learning the language of the woods, or like that being really important to the culture, was probably part of what gave me the tools to become interested in ferns. But yeah, I don't know. I was not aware that there was such a thing called a fern back then.
Well, yeah, and certainly your exploration of ferns in the book spans well beyond the Appalachian Mountains, which maybe this is a good time for you to read an excerpt. Would you mind reading an excerpt from Little Seed?
Okay, so I'll read from, this is the end of my book where I go out to Mexico to look for ferns, and I would find myself in the cloud forest of Oaxaca. And at the end of this kind of like little mini adventure in the book, I come upon a grove of tree ferns, which previously in the book I sort of talk about as like possibly mostly being endangered or extinct. A grove of enormous spindly trees lay before us. The trunks were strangely furred, and the light fell into fragments, making dense, bright patchwork on their boles and branches. I traced the trunk of a single specimen upwards, 90, 100 feet, to a lacy green parasol. At its center, there was a clutch of tightly wound croziers. I was barely breathing. To see tree ferns is to experience deep time. I was acutely aware of my body, of my breathing, of how everything around me was fern. I was as close as a person could get, reaching my hand out to rest it on a trunk. No story in my mind except for the feeling of the damp bark against my skin, the leaves overhead, the light as it found us through the lace of the fronds. An inarticulable question accompanied me in the cloud forest and came to visit now in that silence. Something to do with ferns and who I was and why anyone would write a book that is half fern and half family. Here was the answer, as simple and inarticulable as the question. The feeling of wholeness, knowing that this person's place stood as it did and had always been so. I wandered over to a young tree fern near the path. It was only as tall as my hip. At its center, 2 fiddleheads in golden fur, each stem as thick as my forearm. I skimmed my hand over the center of one crozier, tracing my fingertips first around its coil, then over its tightly packed leaves. They were just beginning to unravel.
Oh, I've got goosebumps. So Little Seed is about ferns, and it's about family, but it's also about growing up and kind of finding your own identity. And so along the way, you write about an experience that's shared by many Appalachians, and especially young people, and that's moving away from the region. And I know from personal experience that changed how I felt about where I came from. Did moving away change your conception of Appalachia and how you felt about growing up there?
Yeah, moving away definitely changed it. I think when I first left Johnson City and Asheville and my home, I had like a real affectation about being from this place, because you moved to, I went to UNC Chapel Hill, so it's like a short skip east, but by the time I was in DC and by the time I was like in New York, I was really clinging on to this identity of being Southern for so long and being Appalachian, being from Johnson City. And like, I think it starts to feel like an accent that you're faking. And I think in the same way we're like growing up in the South, and I don't know if you have this experience, but like I felt extremely alienated from the culture in a way that I was like desperate to be part of it, and like obviously, I think the way that I've coped or the way I've accepted it is that the experience of the mountains like belongs to me, you know, the experience of nature and like the natural world that like clearly has formed me, that belongs to me, even if I didn't feel for reasons of race and ethnicity and gender and like all of these complicated kind of like marginalized reasons. I didn't belong to the South. I think as I moved into places where it was easier to exist, it felt important to be able to say that I was Appalachian because there's no one around to say I wasn't, in the same way that like when I was growing up in Johnson City, I just like constantly felt like I didn't belong. And there was all of this intense just like tension about like being alive. As I picked up other identities and became more confident, just like more mature, I think that desire and that need like really loosened its grip. And so by the time I started, you know, I haven't been back to Johnson City since, gosh, like high school or something. I don't know. But I think, you know, like 10 years, 15, 20 years later now, like it's like when I have gone back, like for instance, I went back to Asheville to give a talk like the January before the pandemic started. I went back and I just felt like an intense alienation of like race, you know, in a way that I think I found very sad and very disappointing. And I had this like really intense rejection of it, you know, where I was like, I don't like the way that it feels here. It's so white. It feels so falsely progressive in so many ways. And like, it was a real disappointment to go back to this place that like I had wanted to belong to for so long. And I felt like was constantly rejecting me. And then to go back and feel like an instant need to kind of like sequester myself somewhere to not be in that culture because it didn't feel safe to me, you know. And I'm Asian American. I'm not to say that like my like oppression isn't real or whatever, but like I'm certainly more privileged, more easily sort of like fluid in the culture than, you know, I could be. And I think I still felt discombobulated, I think, going back. And so that's something I consider a lot now, is that like it's not for me anymore, but I am still made of this place.
Wei Tchou, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us on Inside Appalachia.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Little Seed is available now from Deep Vellum. In Appalachia, families often hand down quilts from generation to generation. And while some other traditional arts have faded, people have never really stopped quilting. But the tradition can be patchy. Emily Jones Hudson noticed fewer quilters in her hometown of Hazard, Kentucky, especially among African Americans. So she created a workshop series to encourage people to quilt again and recapture some history. In 2023, Folkways reporter Capri Cafaro went to Hazard and brought us this story.
I'm at a quilt shop in downtown Hazard. A group of 4 African-American women are gathered between a few sewing tables. They're chatting about quilts they have in the works.
Thread my needle.
Look at and then I got a green one.
That's
and then my
beautiful.
First pink one, I think you saw it.
Oh, yeah.
These women have been meeting at this shop for the past several months, and they've been making a quilt together. It's the first quilt any of them has ever made.
We didn't really know what we were doing until we sat around and started talking about what was important to us, and it just kind of unfolded.
That's Sandra Jones. While Sandra had never made a quilt, she did have a lot of sewing experience from making clothes. Still, there was a learning curve for her and the others. Rebecca Cornett is one of the women who helped Sandra make the group quilt. Rebecca says it was both exciting and emotional to watch the quilt come together.
We eventually started cutting the fabric and putting it together. And I'd come in and there'd be piece hanging on the wall and I go, oh my God, oh my God. And then the reality hit. You know, this is the vision of the class that we gonna put on the quilt.
Together, the group crafted a quilt that tells a powerful story. A piece of fabric from Ghana is at the center of the quilt. It depicts a woman working. She's surrounded by fabric in varying shades of green printed with mountains. At the top of the quilt are orange and yellow strips of fabric that create a sunrise. At the bottom are outlines of faces in shades of brown, floating in a sea of blue. Sandra says the quilt symbolizes the connection between Africa and Appalachia.
In the water, you see heads floating. These are actually slaves who were thrown overboard. The mountains kind of represent Appalachian mountains because we were tying in Africa and Appalachia culture.
Sandra says the sunrise at the top represents a new dawn for African Americans as they transcend struggle. When she finished sewing the sun rays, the quilt was finally complete. Sandra says she breathed a sigh of relief.
It was intense from beginning to end. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
The women in this group are from the Hazard area. While this is the first quilt any of them made, they all grew up around quilt making. Katie Glover is in her 80s. She remembers watching her mother and grandmother quilt by hand.
I would watch them, sit around and watch them make quilts. They would have this old quilting frame that would be hanging from the ceiling. And all the neighbors would come and help them sew, and they sewed by hand.
I grew up watching my mom, helping my mom sew and quilt. I would help her cut, I would help her iron, I would help her do other little things like markings.
That's Sandra again, and this is her sister, Emily Jones Hudson.
I remember my mom sewing all the time. But you see, I never had that interest.
Quilting wasn't something these women pursued in their adult life. It seemed to skip their generation. Most were too busy balancing work and family. A few years ago, Emily noticed that people weren't quilting as much as when she was a child, especially within Hazard's African American community.
It's a big thing in the Appalachian culture. It's a big thing in the African American culture. And one of the things that I was concerned about was that this tradition in the African American community was dying out.
And that's why Emily started these quilting workshops known as the Stories Behind the Quilt. The workshops are a project of the Southeast Kentucky African American Museum and Cultural Center. So far, the women have made 2 quilts and have plans to make 1 more. Sandra noticed the participants' quilt-making confidence grew between the first workshop series and the second.
Everybody was a little hesitant during the first workshop because they had never used a sewing machine. And they had never quilted or sewn anything. The second time around, they were more excited about it. They were like, okay, I'll iron, I'll sew. They volunteered.
It seems that the Stories Behind the Quilt workshops have reinvigorated an interest in quilt making within Hazard's Black community, just as Emily had hoped.
Folks that ain't never quilted before, ain't sewed before, they're coming out on the other side of these workshops inspired. Sister Katie done bought a machine and is making quilts, like she's a quilt factory.
Indeed, Katie is a quilt factory. She's now made 4 quilts and has started 2 more. She has a specific reason she's making so many.
These quilts that I'm making today, they're going to be my grandbabies. I'm going to give them to my grandbabies. I've got 7 grandbabies.
Quilts weren't the only thing to come out of these workshops. During the process, Emily says the women also shared and documented stories of their lives.
One workshop, as we were quilting, and the topic just came up of Black businesses that used to be here in the area. Another workshop, we talked about Black churches. We're trying to get these things documented, because if we don't get the history documented with each passing generation, it's like we never were here.
Rebecca thinks that sharing stories about making quilts with her kids is helping spark new interest in the younger generation. Now, when Rebecca's children visit her, they ask to come to the quilt shop.
They want to come down to see what I'm talking about. So I think this is only the beginning of getting history being talked about, young people being interested, and I just think it's the beginning of something good.
More and more young people are becoming interested in the project. In a video posted online, one little girl visited the quilt shop to see the new quilt the group made.
And this is the front.
That's the African lady.
Yeah, it is.
As the workshops continue, there will be a chance for new people to join the process. They'll continue the work started by this group of women, sustaining Hazard's tradition of quilt making 1 stitch at a time. In Hazard, Kentucky, this is Capri Cafaro for Inside Appalachia.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Amethyst Kia, Wayne Henderson, Jane Kramer, Jerry Melms, Steve Earle, John Blissard, and Blue Dot Sessions. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.